everybody, this is Mike with On Point Preparedness. Real quick, we're going to have a little bit of a different video today. We're going to talk about a topic that I had actually started my YouTube channel on, and that is coming cold crisis and solar cycles and a solar minimum. We're going to get into some of the interviews I did about 5 years back. Before I do that, I did have a live stream yesterday. A lot of people emailed me about how it was private. They couldn't see it. I had some microphone issues where certain my screen displays weren't activating my mic, and so a third almost of the video was without audio. So what I'm going to do with those is hopefully maybe tomorrow or the next day, I'm actually going to split yesterday's live stream into 3 different mini videos. So it'll be a little bit more manageable for people to view. It'll be on some topics such as the wave dreams that people have been having, talk about Trump, and also some of the current events. But for this one, this is going to be really interesting. It's mostly going to be a somewhat secular discussion. It is going to tie into the end times. And then there is some spiritual lessons towards the end of this, and just really a demonstration of how strong spiritual forces are involved in these end times, and basically the forces that are against us or before us as we proceed through these times. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm going to go ahead and switch on over to my screen share here, and I want to show you some of the videos I did. Again, this is 5 years back. I actually find it interesting for this to come full circle now and see it become more of a prevalent topic. So this was back in 2014, October 14, 2014. This is the very first video I ever did on YouTube. I had a blog on preparedness much longer before that, maybe half a year before that. But this was the very first one. Now, there's going to be a lot of skeptics out there that say, oh, look at Mike interviewing someone from NASA. That's going to be the first red flag for them. Let me just say that, I really don't support NASA, but John Casey, who I interviewed, he deflected from NASA. He also worked, I think, for a short stint in the Bush administration, was basically very disenchanted with government and bureaucrats and politics and everything like that, and so he left and went private. So that's that story on the NASA. But we're going to go over some things that he was telling me back in 2014. You've also got the video reference here if you want to watch this. A little bit later, in May 21st, 2015, I interviewed him again. The first one was more so on solar cycles, which I'm going to tell you about here. The cycles of our sun, just like we have seasons, the sun has its own type of seasons, if you will. And in this video, that's where we talked mostly about the sun and mostly about John Casey and other scientists' predictions that come around 2020 to 2030, we're going to be in some type of deep solar minimum. Again, this was back in 2014, so not a lot of people were looking into this. So that's that first video. And then as the temperatures drop, you actually start to see increase in very weird weather anomalies, as well as geographic or geological anomalies, such as earthquakes. You also have volcanic eruptions and just all sorts of weird stuff. I mean, we're already seeing a whole lot of weirdness in the weather today, and we know that there's a spiritual connotation behind all of this. We believe that it's the end times, but there's also a scientific rationale as well, and this is all sort of tied together. So I wanted to show you this third video. Again, the first 2 is about the sun and earthquakes, and the third one is about his book Upheaval. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the science behind what he and others were studying for decades before we even got to this point. This point being, a lot of scientists are now waking up and saying, something's not right. We're actually going to go into some pretty hard times up ahead. But I want to show you a couple of the graphs which explain this, and then show you some more current data on what's happening. So this is his book, Upheaval. And actually, back in 2017, John Casey had a stroke, and so I don't even know if he's doing this any longer. I may have to see if I can check up with him to see how he is doing. But he was gracious enough to send me an ebook of his book Upheaval here, as well as I have his book, oops, sorry about that, Dark Winter. This one is really good. If you're looking for proof, and a lot of scientists that back the fact that we're going into a cold minimum or a solar minimum, Dark Winter and Upheaval are two really good books that are written for the common man. His first book, Cold Sun, is really, really techy. It may not be good for an average reader, but Dark Winter, which mostly speaks about the cold, and Upheaval, which talks about the earthquakes, very easy to understand. And he has lots of graphics to prove his points and his theories. So this first one here is the number of earthquakes that he's plotted from, I think that's 1975 to 2005. And although a lot of mainstream media sources will say, no, there's no increase in earthquakes, or the USGS will say, no, there's really no increase in earthquakes, John Casey and others are showing, no, there definitively is an increase in earthquakes, magnitude 4.0 and greater, which is what this graphic is showing. In this graphic, or this correlation that he has here, he tries to show the relationship between the number of sunspots that are on the sun versus geologic earthquakes. So if you don't know what sunspots are, they're basically spots on the sun, and they're our measurement of determining solar activity. So they're like little black spots on the sun when you look at the sun through particular filters. And so they count these spots every year. And what you see here over on the right is a sunspot cycle. And then, as the sunspots increase, your earthquakes decrease, and vice versa. So what he has here on the left-hand side is, right now, he's trending 1975 again, all the way up through 2005. And you can see the sunspot solar cycle, 21, 22, 23. Coming up into 2020, it'll be the, I think, number 25 solar sunspot cycle. But you can see that the number of earthquakes is increasing. And what he's showing is, starting around 2005, sunspots actually started to decrease. So there's an inverse relationship. As the sun goes dormant, you have an increase in volcanic activity as well as earthquakes. It's quite interesting. They're not exactly sure why that happens, but there's a lot of documented evidence that it does happen through recorded history. That might actually be the graph that I have here. This is a really excellent graph. So we know that a lot of people are having dreams or having predictions about a San Andreas fault going off or the New Madrid going off. When the last time I talked to him, he was very concerned about a New Madrid earthquake. And you can see here, these are the solar sunspot minimums. And so in some of these later graphs, actually, let me go to this one right here before we discuss this here. See these little wavy lines up and down, up and down, up and down? These are 11-year solar cycles. So it's well documented that the sun goes through an 11-year cycle. Again, just like we have seasons. So it has a peak, and then it drops off. And that's what you see every 11 years, up and down, up and down, up and down. But then you start to have these more major trends. You can see it dip down and then go up. And see, we were in this warming period. That's when you had a lot of this Al Gore climate crisis, global warming type thing, which they're no longer peddling. Now it's just climate change. But now you see here, we're starting to dip down into 2020 as per the recorded sunspots that we're seeing year after year. And what John Casey was saying is, scientists really understand the 11-year cycle, but they don't really understand more longer term cycles. And specifically what he was looking at was, I believe it was a 203 or 206 year solar cycle. And I think the last time that brought us back to the Dalton minimum, or I believe that time period was called the year without a summer. It was where there was major famines, crop loss, starvation, very incredible cold temperatures, and even worse than that was in the Marauder minimum. And we'll get into a little bit about these time periods later on in the show here. But this is a really good graph showing the 11-year cycle as well as some of these longer term ones. Now, with that in mind, going back to this graphic and how it relates to earthquakes, you can see during each of these longer term 203-year cycles, not the 11-year, the 203, there have actually been major earthquakes at the New Madrid fault, particularly during the Dalton minimum. That's where we had like the big earthquake on the New Madrid. Something like that happening today would be absolutely catastrophic. But he starred them here every time the New Madrid went off. And it just so happened that they corresponded very well to these minimum periods. It's very, very interesting. Going forward, this is a very simplistic graph, but when he was talking about this stuff, and he was talking about this stuff since early 2000s, and he's written multiple letters to then President Bush and a lot of other presidents to say, hey, you need to prepare via a whole host of ways in terms of food protection, in terms of earthquake protection, in terms of just so many different things. He was writing them for decades upon decades, and it just was never really heard. So he was doing these things for decades upon decades. I just happened to get wind of it and had an interview with him back in 2014. And now here we are about 5-6 years later, and here we are. Right at about 2020, and this is when he suggested that it would really start, that we would really start to see some of the effects of this new minimum period. And the bottom of it, the worst of it, would be around 2031. So we were really into that. I remember having the conversation with him, and I said, John, and just think about it this way. Back in 2014, there was a whole bunch of stuff happening prophetically and things related to the end times. And I said, John, there's a lot of stuff going on. Solar cycles and a potential, and we're not saying confirmed ice age coming, but a potential ice age or even really hard times. That's the least of people's worries. People are not thinking about that right now. And I said, it's probably hard to get your word out to warn people about this. And do you have any recommendations in terms of how people should prepare, how people should take this seriously? And he sort of seemed to agree that there is just so much going on right now that people really aren't focused on this. And come 2020 with the riots and all these pandemic things, there's way more to think about than this. But I think we really do need to think about this and just see how this is a high potential. And in fact, we see this playing out in real life, current day news, which I'm going to show you in some articles, and also give you some more resources on how you can see this manifesting. And again, it's not necessarily unexpected. We expect these things if you're a student of prophecy in the end times. This just gives you a little bit more information about scientifically, how is it all carrying out? Because a lot of the things in relation to the weather or geological things, volcanoes, earthquakes, it all is intrinsically linked scientifically somehow, and this just gives you a little bit of info. So what I wanted to do from here was give you a couple more resources, as well as show you some current day news things where we're starting to see the effects of this grand solar minimum period increasing here in 2020. I would like to point you, I pointed to him a while back. He's, this is purely a secular resource. And so he's really just about encouraging people to bring back farming into their homes, sustainability, things like that. It's a secular resource channel. But he has two websites, Ice Age Farmer and then Ice Age Farmer Resources. We're actually going to look at one of his videos with another individual here, Curtis Stone. And we're going to look at that not only from a secular perspective, but also a spiritual one. But he has these two channels. Ice Age Farmer Resources just goes into some clips. I think this one was from the Epic Times or NTD News, where China just had devastating weather, a cold snap, which I think knocked out 25% of their wheat production. And residents there are scrambling to get wheat. We'll watch that here in a second. And just some other things we'll look through here. So I'm just going to go ahead and play this reel for you, particularly this one on China. It's only a minute long, and you just have a listen. Let me just switch on over here so you guys can have a full screen.
Central China's Henan province is the country's top wheat-producing province. Its annual yield accounts for more than 25% of China's wheat production. Recently, social media users in Anyang County of Henan province notified one another that the local wheat production has seen a significant drop. Locals rushed to grocery stores to hoard grains. A cold snap in April could be one of the adverse conditions resulting in the drop of wheat production.
安阳2020年4月10号，白茫茫的一片，下了很大的雪，今年的庄稼又该受冻害了。
Yeah, so that one was from the Epic Times. But still, I think somewhere else that region maybe contributes somewhere around 20-25% of the wheat. I don't know if that's specifically for China or other regions, but significant impact there. Here's another one. I don't really know much about Sky News. The Ice Age Farmer, he commented on it as a little bit of a wacky channel, but still, they're starting to capture some of these events. This rare late spring snowstorm blankets Lake Tahoe, and they're actually saying the grand solar minimum cycle has begun. We also have started to see evidence of this back a couple years where we had the polar vortexes, and the reason why that's happening is, actually, let me go to this little slide right here. This is one of Ice Age Farmer's most recent videos. And so he's putting another theory out there as in terms of, why are we seeing record rain in some areas and record heat in other areas, but then, a very steady trend of record cold temperatures continuing on. And so here's some of his theories here that he's researched. And so as you have the sun putting off less energy, right, these solar spots or these sunspots are basically energy, coronal mass ejections. And when you have less of them, it just signifies less energy coming from the sun, less heat impacting our planet. And so with less sunspots and less solar activity, that means you have decreased solar wind coming from the sun. And then he refers back to this galactic cosmic rays, GCRs, can reach Earth, because basically the sun is not creating the solar wind that's pushing those away. And so I don't know the references behind this statement here, but I find him to be a pretty astute researcher, and so yeah, I think he's on track here, where he says these GCRs are somehow related to seismic and volcanic activity. So if you have increased GCRs, you also have increased volcanic activity, increased cloud cover, hail, weak jet stream. That's where I think it relates back to the polar vortex. It was all about a weak jet stream, and some of that polar cold Arctic air was able to go further south. This weak jet stream also causes extreme precipitation and temperature extremes, which we're seeing. Very hot hots, very cold colds. It's a very strange thing, right? Where you have like a record hot temperature in France. We saw people in front of the Eiffel Tower, bathing in those pools there. But then we have things like the polar vortex, which was extreme freezing. And this is all, pretty much related to the sun. But mostly what I want to warn you about, and what Christian here at his channel is warning people about, is that it results in a bad growing season where you have literally food collapse because the industrial agriculture just can't produce the food because the growing season is shortened. You have some of these cold snaps that are unexpected, and you start to get these frosts that kill off crops. And so this is seemingly going to occur right around this time window. Again, going back to some of John Casey's work here in his book Upheaval, we were right here. And so we are pretty much in the midst of seeing whether this is, again, going to be like another Dalton minimum, which is also referred to as the year without a summer. Now, some other things going on currently in the news. And then we're also going to go back here and talk spiritually about some things that I saw in Ice Age Farmer's last video here. Help you to understand, we as Christians, how much we need to be fighting for souls and leading people to Christ in this time. But before we get to that, looking at some more recent headlines, I think this one was in 2019, but again, unseasonable record-breaking cold across country. This one's more recent. Ice Age Farmer actually talked about this in his latest video. Trump memo demands new fleet of Arctic icebreakers be ready by 2029. Now, the main narrative in this article is that we need them for the Arctic region because of the advances by the Russian and China military, which is true. There's been a lot of weird things happening at the Antarctic. But the timing is also sort of interesting, that he wants all these icebreakers, all these nuclear-powered ice-breaking ships in place by 2029. And, we go back to this graph, and it's like, that's just interesting that the bottom of this solar minimum is right around 2031. Are we even going to get to that period? I mean, right now it just seems like everything's on fire, and who knows if we're going to make it, for the next couple years with how things are going. But we just never know. You never know how long the timeline is going to go. But very interesting that the bottom of this is predicted sometime around 2031, and Trump starts to talk about a new fleet of Arctic icebreakers. So perhaps, the government is listening now, behind closed doors, of course. This is from May 24th, 2020. This is from a local news station, WTW-TV. So they talk about the 11-year solar cycles, and then the complete solar cycle would be 22 years. They're talking a little bit about the Earth's magnetic field is, influenced by cosmic radiation and everything like that, just like we've been talking about the GCRs as well as solar winds. But here, I just highlighted this last couple sentences here. Currently, our sun is in a solar minimum. There were 224 days in 2019 without sunspots. And so far this year, there have been 113 days without sunspots. Some solar scientists have called this the blankest sun in modern history. How will this affect us here on Earth? If the past is any indication, we may be in for a period of lower than average temperatures. This doesn't mean we won't have hot days, but overall, cooler summers may be in store. We'll see. They're really downplaying exactly what's happening here, because if you look on the internet and research the Dalton minimum, or research the year without a summer, again, major crop damages. And again, we're seeing this. You just saw the video from China. We've seen this here in the United States, again, because precipitation is also influenced. We have major precipitation issues. I think here in Ohio and a lot of the other growing states, there's just been complete flooding where the planting season was really postponed and the harvest wasn't as bountiful by a major degree just because of how much rain we've been getting. And this is all sort of related. If you want to call it climate change, scientifically, this is seemingly what it's all pointing to. It's all related to the sun, because the sun is the greatest influencer on everything that we really know about our weather. It is the main generator of heat. And so it really, man-made greenhouse gases and everything like that is so minimal, really, to just how much the sun plays a part in weather. It's just everything we do is fairly minuscule. Here's another one. I found this really interesting. May 12th, 2020. The sun is asleep. Deep solar minimum feared as 2020 sees record-setting 100-day slump. This is a sign that solar minimum is underway, reads spaceweather.com. So far this year, the sun has been blank 76% of the time, a rate surpassed only once before in the space age. Last year, 2019, the sun was blank 77% of the time. 2 consecutive years of record-setting spotlessness adds up to a very deep solar minimum indeed. This is the same article here. This is a different one. Let's see here. Sun reaches record sunspot low. This is December 23rd, 2019. It says NASA is going on record in predicting this solar minimum cycle will be a grand solar minimum, as it may be the weakest in the last 200 years. That is pretty interesting because, again, for John Casey's research, which had continued on for decades before people were even talking about this, he referenced a 203 year or 206 year, I can't forget the details, I'd have to watch my video with him again, but there would be a 203 or 206 year solar cycle in addition to the very small ones. Let's see the graphic that I'm trying to pull up here. Yeah. So yeah, every about 200 years, you see one of these big dips, one of these big minimums. How bad is the minimum? You don't really know. I mean, the Delta minimum was pretty bad. And if you look, approximately another 200 years before that, even worse. So we really don't know. We really don't know how bad it's going to get. But again, just, less than half a year, this was in December, written in December 2019, NASA is now on record saying this sun is the weakest it's been in the last 200 years. Really proving Casey's research here, that we are indeed entering this period. What else do they have here? Yeah, over the past 100 years, when the sun has gone through grand solar minimums, the Earth's climate has cooled off significantly, as in the Dalton minimum from 1790 to 1830, with lower than average global temperatures. During the Dalton minimum, the year 1816 was known as the year without summer, as spring and summer failed to arrive, caused by low temperatures and an increase in volcanic activity. Solar scientists will be watching the sun and the number of spotless days in 2020 to see if there's any correlation between lower sunspots, cooler temperatures, and an increase in volcanic activity, as well as general geologic activity such as earthquakes. Very, very interesting. This is, let's see what this website is. Utah Public Radio. So it's very interesting that they're starting to discuss this now. Talking about increase in volcanic activity, lower sunspots, cooler temperatures, increased earthquakes. NASA is saying that this is the weakest the sun has been in the last 200 years. So, yeah, this is definitely coming. Now, does it really change our perspective on things? No. We're called not to fear, but it is good to know what's coming and prepare as best you can within reason. You don't want to get hyper-focused on physical preparedness, because then you can actually put yourself into bondage and completely forget about God. You just do what's prudent, and you leave the rest to God. But I'm just really wanting to warn people out there, I can fellowship with people who are pre-tribulation rapture, that we're gonna be out of here before any of this happens. If you want to believe that, that's fine. But my warning has been and always will be, if your eschatology doesn't go according to plan, and for whatever reason, I always like eschatological things. I always like to think about, what if this were to happen? What if that were to happen? I just keep things in the back of my mind. What if it were not to happen? There's a lot of people who were not expecting to go through hardship that will find themselves in hardship. And I believe that will be a great impact to their faith. You know, there'd be a lot of questions. You know, why have I been left here? You know, why do we have to go through this? If you can still endure and it's not going to be an impact to your faith whatsoever, then that's fine. But again, the Bible speaks about being prudent. A wise man sees danger and hides himself. The foolish go on and suffer for it. You're seeing these things play out in terms of the riots, in terms of potential civil war. We've already seen everyone rush to the grocery stores because of the pandemic stuff. And who knows what's on the horizon. One of my videos that I might focus on over the next couple of days is a potential blackout. I had mentioned that several weeks ago, and now we're seeing some mainstream articles talk about China's involvement in cyber hacking and things like that. And then you've got these solar minimums to think about. The Bible says that the tribulation period will be worse than the earth has ever seen. And of course, you can't prepare for something like that fully. But, you know, it can, you know, help you and help others, you know, take the edge off, so to say. And you can be a light unto others, especially, you know, if you're giving to people who don't have anything in these times, which will also be another challenge to your faith. Because again, when there's things in short supply and people are looking to you for help and aid, that'll be a test of your faith. Are you going to give or not give? So again, there's a lot of headwinds up ahead. So at this point, I want to switch on over to a little bit of spiritual discussion. So there is a lot of stuff going on, and if you're not grounded in the Word and you're not in prayer and, you know, really in fellowship with the Lord and with the body of Christ, I mean, these things will overwhelm you. It will definitely overwhelm you, and that's why we have to stay grounded in the Word, with the Lord, and with fellow believers in the body of Christ. These things will completely consume you. But for those who do have good fellowship with the Lord and others, you know, we look at these things and we say, okay, these things are coming up ahead. You know, what can we do? Aside from, you know, spiritual warfare, prayer warriors, things like that, you know, how can we get a little bit ready for the things to come? Now, all these things are happening. There's a lot of physical issues up ahead, but ultimately we know that there's spiritual drivers behind all of this. And a lot of my past teaching videos have been discussing how, you know, people are having dreams that are not from the Lord. A lot of this movement in terms of patriotism can have very negative spiritual influencing factors to them. There's just a lot of negative things going on in which people can be deceived. And so that's why I wanted to highlight this one portion. And it's nothing negative about Ice Age Farmer or the Curtis Stone. They're both on a journey of you know, looking into spiritual matters, right? And it's just very, very interesting to me what Curtis Stone says here for about a minute. So Curtis Stone, he has a fairly large farming channel. I think he has something like 300 or 400,000 subscribers. And so in this interview, you know, they get into a lot of the data here. I do suggest you watch it. It was very intriguing. They do go into a lot of the data behind the solar minimums, the time periods in which they happened, and what to expect going on into the future, and maybe some things you can do to help you and your family and your community get prepared. But then towards the end, or actually intermingled in this whole entire interview, Curtis Stone, rather, he starts talking about how the elite, the NWO, talks about the Rockefellers and everything like that, starts talking about how, you know, they've really controlled the food supply, and now they're trying to take it away to control the people, right? So we see this going on. And for those of you who have seen my last couple of videos talking about the darkness is being purposefully exposed and we're being led into a false light, you're actually seeing this play out in this video about farming. And so you can see just how prevalent this is, right? It's not just a pandemic movie or the Out of the Shadows thing. What I want to show here in this small clip is that these things being the NWO, the controlling NWO, the totalitarian regime, how they want to steal life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from you. The Federal Reserve, all this stuff. It's being brought to the surface purposefully in a major way. In that you're starting to have it creep up in things like farming channels. I know people on social media that are on Facebook and things like that. It's showing up in like motherhood moms groups. It's proliferating everywhere. And there's a spiritual motivation behind that. And so that's what we're going to look at just in this little clip. Again, I just want to be clear. These two individuals are, walking out a spiritual journey. And so I would ask that you pray for both of them. But the world is really being bombarded with spiritual warfare. So let's go ahead and just listen to this small, maybe 2-minute clip. And particularly, we're going to look at what Curtis has to say here. Let me switch on over. You guys can see the video just fine.
But it's our culture. But we have hamburgers in America and traditional feasts that come with the harvest season, and it's everything about our spirituality, even in many cases, and our culture comes intimately with food because it's something we have to do and we do every day, and it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the one thing that I've really started to see is when you pull a lens back, really what's happening is on all fronts, there's a massive push to disconnect us from who we are, where we stand, and what we're actually supposed to be. And seeing that, and actually, as I've spent the last year really researching the law, that's become my pastime, my kind of hobby when I'm not working or with my family. And you see it there too. The legal system, the corporate creative, the corporate fiction, the all caps name person, all of these, everything in every aspect of human interaction and institutions is to disconnect us from our true divinity. And I can honestly tell you, Christian, I've never really been a spiritual guy, but through my research in law and seeing the correlation between how our nature is so connected to nature, it's made me spiritual, because it's made me see what the controllers don't want us to see. Exactly. And in a way that's kind of, it's invigorated my spirituality and awakened me to our true nature and our true purpose. And it's basically going against everything these assholes are trying to do.
Yeah. The future.
Oh, apologies for the language, but very interesting, right? Just the language, right? We're awakening. And he used the words, to our true divinity, that people themselves have a divinity unto themselves, which in the Christian belief, right, our works are nothing but dirty rags, and the way we put on righteousness is in Christ, that we have no righteousness in and of ourselves. But again, a couple key things here. His research and a lot of things that he's seeing going on in the economy and with these controllers, it's awakening his spiritual walk. He's realizing that they're taking something away from him, that they're hiding humanity's true purpose, our divinity, our potential. This, if you've been following the last couple videos, I mean, this is really important, and hopefully you can now see, right, just how proliferative the spiritual warfare is. The NWO is purposefully being exposed, and everyone from your mom and your motherhood group to farmers to whoever else are all starting to say, hey, the Rockefellers and all these elites and these controllers, NWO, they're taking away something from us. We need to realize our potential. We need to come together. And ultimately, if we don't intervene, because, again, we are to fulfill the Great Commission, we are to be vessels for righteous works unto God. If we don't use our gifts and spread the gospel, people are going to fall into Gnosticism, into this belief that we need to tamp down and push out all these elite controllers, all these NWO folks, and we need to regain what has been lost. And Gnosticism, if you're not really familiar with the term, it is self-elevation. It's actually what happened in the Garden of Adam and Eve. You eat of the fruit and you will become like gods. That is the true false light deception. And it is absolutely amazing to see it from this vantage point. It truly is happening, and it's happening at a very staggering pace. So in addition to all the worldly things happening, this is another clear sign to me of why we are in the end times. And if you have discernment, you see some of these things going on, it's like, wow, okay, there is definitely something moving on a global scale. There's something moving through the populace that is leading them into a Gnostic belief system. And so we need to not put a lampshade over all light, and we need to make sure that the gospel is being proclaimed to the ends of the earth. Simple as that. And as I mentioned in my live stream, if you didn't catch that yesterday, a lot of people get a little bit shy talking about Christ and talking about the gospel. One of the key things that helps you to be an evangelist is your testimony. Revelation says that by the power of the blood of Christ and by the word of their testimony, those two things, by the power of the blood of Christ and your testimony is very personal to you and you alone. No one can take that away from you. If you share your testimony with someone and someone just laughs hysterically, you can just say, hey, you know what? That's my testimony. No one else knows it better than me, so sorry you didn't like it. Again, your testimony is for you and you alone. No one can take that away from you. No one knows it better than you. And so it's a wonderful evangelical tool to bring people to Christ, show how Christ has really transformed you and your walk, and then you can give them the gospel itself. So, serious things going on. I do want to just end with maybe one little note here about the whole false light thing going on. I've received countless emails, as well as let me just go ahead and switch off here. I've received countless emails and comments from people saying there's not really a whole lot of people talking about false light. And this isn't to toot my own horn or anything like that, but a lot of people reference John at E511 Ministries. Me and him have talked back and forth. Again, at a time maybe later in the future, he'll be coming on and we'll be discussing some of this false light stuff. So I know many of you will be looking forward to that. He has a Road to Antichrist series on YouTube if you want to check that out. E511 Ministries. His name's John. But a lot of people refer to him. A lot of people have talked about my channel. There's a couple others out there as well that are talking about the false light. And again, as I look at some of these other channels, you'll see a common theme of, wow, no one's really talking about this. Everyone's blinded. Everyone's too focused on the NWO. Everyone's too focused on revival, thinking that revival is going to come, when in fact the Bible says a great falling away is going to come. The absolute opposite. We talked about that in the Waves Dream video, that some of these people with questionable fruit are all talking about revival coming. What I wanted to say about this is, sometimes if you find someone that is teaching something that's a rarity, but it's truth, right? Like a lot of the comments on my channel, like, oh, wow, no one's talking about this, but you are, and I'm so thankful that you're talking about this. Because of the rarity, you tend to have this willingness to trust them immediately. right? So we sort of have this psychological thing in our head where, if someone's talking about something so detailed and so rare, and they have the discernment from the Lord to be talking about this, surely they're solid, right? Surely they're solid, without really knowing everything else about that person. And we tend to give up, not necessarily give up, but we tend to trust that person more immediately than we would if they're talking about more general topics, right? So if there's a YouTuber and they're talking about general Christian topics, general Christian teachings, it takes a little bit of a while to build up trust, right? It's like, okay, yeah, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good, okay, and then you start to build that up. But just because of the rarity of talking about this false light and something that a whole lot of people are not yet seeing, it's like, oh, wow, yeah, that guy, that gal, whoever, they're really spot on, and you start to trust them almost immediately. I would just say be cautious with that. There's a verse in the Bible where Paul is referring to a brother who is actually not named, and it says, we're sending this person to you. They were sending him to one of the churches, and they said that we have tested him often and have always found him faithful. And I talked about in previous videos about how testing yourself and testing others is a very good thing, and it should be done. Testing someone, you don't have to say, it's not like a literal test, and you don't have to actually make it apparent that you're testing them. Honestly, the best form of testing is where they don't even know they're being tested. But testing is a good thing, and all I want to say is, don't jump on every single YouTube channel that's talking about the false light simply because it's a rare thing. I may get into details later on this, but I'm discerning some things about some other channels, and I'm feeling a little hesitant myself, and so I just see the warning there. So I just want to make sure that you're grounded, and just because something's rare and someone's telling truth on this particular thing, just always make sure you're continually testing to make sure that that person is grounded in the faith. Because we see it all over the time. Just because someone preaches against the NWO does not necessarily mean they have the true gospel. Just because someone preaches against prosperity doesn't mean that they have the true gospel. I went through this with Hebrew Roots. And when I did a rebuke of affiliate ministries and everything like that, a lot of folks in Hebrew Roots, because Hebrew Roots is a very legalistic or hyper conservative end of Christianity versus your New Apostolic Reformation, which is the liberal, shaking on the floor, crazy type stuff. Hebrew Roots is more legalism. It's more conservative. Hebrew Rooter channels, like Philia, like Zach Bauer, or no, what's the other one? I forget. There's a whole bunch of them. They will have videos talking against prosperity gospel. They will talk against the New Apostolic Reformation. They will talk against abortion. They will talk against LGBT. They'll talk against and condemn all those things. And what they say on those matters is truth. It is literally truth. But that does not mean that they have the correct gospel. Hebrew Roots, Torah observance, Torah pursuant, saying that you need to follow the old law of Moses, and it somehow gains you aspects of righteousness. That is a false gospel. Read Galatians. That's exactly the same thing that's happening. But it is really a lesson in discernment that even though someone can speak against multiple heresies, does not necessarily mean that they've got it right. And so with this false light thing, as more channels start to take notice of this and start to call this thing out, because it is a rarity, don't just jump on board saying that this person, because it's so rare and they have the discernment to see this and start talking about it, that you categorize them instantly as a safe source. Just be precautious with that. So that's really all I had to say tonight. Again, all bearing my time. I said this in the live stream yesterday, but I'm just exhausted. Sorry, guys. I'm just so exhausted. I try to do these live streams after all the kids go to bed, but I got 3 little ones and a 4th one on the way. There's a lot of stuff going on at home too. And unfortunately, like 10, 11 p.m. at night is the only time I have to do these things. But if I can, hopefully get a video out tomorrow or over the next couple days, I will break down yesterday's live stream into maybe 3 different parts, just as a teaser in case you missed the live stream in terms of what I'm going to be talking about. I don't know exactly which order I'm going to put these in, but number 1, a lot of you will find it very interesting that there's an older video of Marina Abramovic, the spirit cooking lady. She actually supports Trump. She says that he's bringing the Great Awakening. He's bringing a change, and she says it's a good thing. That's going to be an interesting video. Number 2, we're actually going to talk about my 7-year-old daughter's dreams involving waves, which happened the day after I did that video analyzing the dreams from 2 different people, which were identical dreams about waves. Lots of people are having dreams about tsunamis and waves, but the interesting thing is some people see the waves as good, which is what I exposed in my last video, and then some people, like my daughter, are seeing the waves as something bad. So it's just super interesting that people are having dreams about 2 waves. In one dream, 2 different waves coming and hitting. My daughter had this dream the day after I did this show, and she was asleep. She was asleep when I did this live stream, so she had no way of knowing what I was talking about the day prior, but had a dream involving 2 waves. Super interesting. So we'll talk about that in a second video. And then third, there's just a lot going on with the news and everything like that, so we'll probably chat a little bit about current events and things of that nature. So hopefully until tomorrow, I'll see you then, and no more blunders with the audio or any other technical issues. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video. Good night, everyone.